So I met Jesse a couple years ago when he was new to town. He was going to 1 million cups, doing a lot of networking and getting his name out there. And that's one thing I will recommend is Jesse got his name out there because he showed up. He kept being present and he brought positive energy and he was excited when other people were succeeding as well. And so that's what I would encourage you when you're starting to think about your business and your marketing strategies. Just show up. Just start bringing that positive energy and start rooting for others because they will root for you as well. Jesse, I don't know if there's anything else for me to share other than I'm very grateful that you're part of our community right now. You have a really excellent business model. You've been doing really great work, and you've been a great community member, especially to the Black Chamber. So thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Give it up for him.
So good evening, good evening, good evening. How everybody feeling? You couldn't pay me to complain. Another beautiful day in paradise. All right. So as Brandon just mentioned, I am Jesse Bullock, owner and founder of Bullseye Consulting. So before we get into the scaling piece, because when it comes to scaling, a lot of the scalability of anyone's business is going to be based on their mindset, right? So before we start talking about some of the tricks of the trade that are going to get you to that space of actually being able to scale your business, we're going to rewind back a little bit to talk about what got me here in front of you guys, and then talk about the current state of affairs so that we understand the opportunity that exists in owning a business currently, and then close it out with those strategies that you guys can employ within your businesses to scale them to a space where you are not owning a job, but you're actually owning a legacy building asset that provides generational wealth over the long term and financial security over the short term. So as I mentioned, rewinding back in time for a moment. So I spent 10 years on active duty in the Air Force. And during that time, the biggest value proposition from wearing a uniform for that period of time is understanding the value of structure and processes. So when I joined the Air Force, my career was already laid out for me on paper, and it was my choice on what I wanted to materialize, how I wanted for my life to actually materialize. But it was all laid out. The game plan was there. Any rules that I needed to understand to succeed within the game of the military, it had all been defined, right? And what that ties to when you're thinking about your business, because a lot of business growth is about the psychology of your teams and the structures that you put in place. So when your team doesn't understand the opportunity that they have to grow up under your umbrella, it shortens the return that they're going to bring back to your business over the course of their employment with you. That time in the Air Force kind of gave me that understanding of the value of structure. So let me give you an example of one of the structural components of the military that frustrated the hell out of me when I wore the uniform. There was literally an entire page full of words to tell me how to put my belt on. Is there anybody in this room that needs an entire page of words to tell you how to put your belt on? The reason that frustrated me is because it's like, I don't need a whole page of words to tell me how to put on my belt. Well, the thing about that, like as a concept, is everybody comes from different backgrounds. So believe it or not, there are some folks that don't use a belt, right? And the military is a composition of folks from all walks of life and backgrounds. So believe it or not, you could have someone that never put on a belt before. So the processes in the military have to speak to the lowest denominator of individual, right? So if we got to give you a whole page full of words so that you show up to the battlefield with your belt on properly, then guess what we're going to give you? A page full of words. Matter of fact, let's make it 2 pages, right? Because when we're in war, like that's what the military does. When the military is at war, the last thing that the military has time to do is to train someone how to put their belt on, which comes to when we start talking about business scalability, there is no common sense in business, right? So if you're thinking that there is, then you're only going to hurt yourself over the long haul, which is where structure and process comes into play. Actually documenting all of the things that are happening within your business and how you expect for those things to materialize. So Moving from the Air Force 11 years ago, which is insane how fast that time is flying. I worked on the corporate side for 4 years before I transitioned into professional consulting. Now, what I learned transitioning from the military and operating on that corporate side is the value of data in the sense of when we are operating a business, we are operating that business to make money, right? Now, if we are making money within our business, but we're not keeping any money at the end of the year, then what have we just done? Right? Like we want to increase our profitability, right? Now, that is the piece that I started to really understand when I transitioned out of the Air Force, because each week we would have our managerial meetings where myself as a manager would meet with the other managers on the staff, the 2 directors and the vice president, and we're looking at the financials. Now, on a corporate setting, it oftentimes happens where data is weaponized. And what I mean by data weaponization is if we are looking at the financial performance that a business has produced, and we know that as a baseline, for every dollar that we make, we spend 22 cents of that dollar on labor. And then all of a sudden, from one quarter to the next, we end up going from spending 22 cents of that dollar on labor to now spending 32% of that dollar on payroll and labor. If y'all had to spend 10 more cents on payroll and labor in your business, would that matter to you? Now, the weaponization of data says if we recognize that 10% variance, then we're just going to lay off 10% of the workforce, right? So that the 10% of the people that comprise that 10% now no longer have a job. That is the weaponization of data, right? And that is not something that I advocate for. However, the maximization of data says that first you understand what is happening in your business from a data perspective for you to know what is working for you and what is not working for you. Because are we going to double down on our efforts if it's not producing profitably? How are you going to know that if you're not tracking your numbers? So that is the data piece that really got brought into clear focus for me when I initially transitioned out of the Air Force. So I did that for about 4 years. In 2018 is when I actually transitioned into professional consulting. Now, the reason that I specify that as professional consultant is the barrier to entry for someone to call themselves a business consultant or a business coach is very low barrier of entry, right? Someone could have, they could be a YouTube university ninja, and all of a sudden they are now going to tell you how to build a profitable business when all that they've done is increase their runtime and watching videos on the internet, right? Is that the type of resource that you want to have advising you in your business, right? So again, that's why I designate the professional. So I started that back in 2018. Now, it is completely different operating a business at the larger scale of things where you got 500 or more employees versus a small business. And with the primary difference being for those large companies that have 500 or more employees, when stuff goes left, right? When it go left, they can call up to headquarters and get an emergency fusion of funding into the business. It's like, oh, we had a mishap, and it's going to cost us $50,000. And headquarters for that corporation can put $50,000 in their account, and now they're continuing to rock and roll because that's cost of business. Can a small business afford to do that? Most cannot, right? Which means it is absolutely essential because we want to grow to be that big scale of a company that's bringing in that kind of revenue and producing that kind of profitability. But how do we get there? I'm glad y'all asked that question because we're going to get into it. But before we actually get into it, let's talk about the current state of affairs. So the value of the dollar. Can anybody tell me what has happened to the value of the dollar from the beginning of the year? To the tune of 10%. So that means if you start at the beginning of this year with $100,000 in your bank account, and you did not touch that bank account from the beginning of the year, that $100,000 is now worth $90,000. Okay? 10% of your money is just gone. Now, do we anticipate for that value to come back to the dollar?
Not really. Not anytime soon. But it depends on how you flip it.
I love that. Absolutely. And that's what we're getting ready to get into. Absolutely. All right. So when we start talking about investing, right? We invest in asset classes, right? Is there anyone that's not familiar with what asset classes are? Beautiful. So we invest in asset classes so that our money will grow. But it's important to kind of understand the current state of affairs as it relates to those assets that we can invest in. So we got the stock market. We can put money into the stock market and we hope that that's going to bring us back a return on investment. Now, what is important to understand about the stock market is probably the primary reason that the government has not declared a recession in the United States. If the stock market wasn't at all-time highs, the government would have likely have already declared that we have been in a recession for quite a while. So now let's get into the logistics of kind of what that means. These are the top 10 companies on the S&P 500, right? The S&P 500 totally produces $61.1 trillion in value to the economy, right? These 10 companies make up, so we're seeing the percentages right here. So Apple alone makes up 7.5% of the total stock market. Now, the reason that I'm sharing this with you guys is because what is causing the stock market to be so valuable right now is all of the speculation around artificial intelligence. These companies are investing heavily in artificial intelligence. So what does that mean? We have had boom and bust cycles within any of the cycles that you can measure, right? So the stock market, again, is super high right now on the back of AI. Now, we're going to figure out how much that the AI is ultimately going to produce in productivity over the course of the years. But for all of these companies to be hedging their bets on one resource, if something happens with AI, which right now China is producing AI at a rapid pace to compete with the AI companies here in the United States. So if China puts out a bunch of cheap AI, and you can think about it like, so growing up, if you got the knockoff J's, right? You're like, yeah, them straight off the boat from China, although all of it was fresh off the boat from China anyway, right? So that's what they would do. China would steal our intellectual property, the design of the Jordan, and then they would produce those Jordans and then sell them for dirt cheap, right? That same thing is happening with AI right now, where China is creating the AI sources right now to compete with the larger AI companies. So what does that mean to this artificial kind of valuation of these companies? At any point in time, it can. Okay? So it's a lot going on in the economy right now that is important for us to be paying attention to as entrepreneurs, because we have the opportunity to leverage how screwed up that things are when we understand the game and the rules of the game. The game is public. The information is available. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to build our businesses to change our communities? We have that ability when we understand what is going on in the market. This is hugely important for you guys to understand, because we can hedge our bets by throwing our money into the stock market, and that AI bubble can bust. And who is that going to hurt?
Whoever really can't afford to lose some money.
The people that got it going to have it. Okay? So it's important for us to understand the game so we play the game properly. This is an asset class that is under stress. Then we got the real estate market. So when we start talking about the high interest rates that have impacted the housing market, right? All of these things impact, because if you purchase a home, homes generally appreciate in value, right? But what happens when your home, your asset, appreciates to a point that no one can afford to buy it?
You can't sell it. You got to reduce the price, which reduces the value.
Right? So on paper, there are a lot of people that's balling because their home on paper is worth a whole lot more than what it's likely going to sell for. So it is important to understand that when you are parking your money in real estate, again, understanding the game. What is going on? We got the high interest rate. We got insurance that is getting crazy, the insurance rates, the volatility within the market generally. It's just so many variables that makes this one challenging as well. All right, which then brings us to gold. So generally, folks purchase gold when currency, the faith in currency is starting to diminish. So we started this talking about the US dollar decreasing in value by 10% just from the beginning of this year. Right? The price of gold.
It's dropping?
No, it's going up. So in January, it was $2,900 an ounce. It was worth $2,900 an ounce. As of this month, it's now $4,300 an ounce. Fueled off of speculation. People are concerned. People that know what's coming, they are hedging their bets. The US dollar is just a piece of paper. It's not backed by anything. Right? So we have watched the price of gold increase 48.3% from the beginning of this year. How much of that increase is true value versus speculation? Right? So you can purchase the gold at this increased price right here because it makes sense thinking, because if it increased 48% from the beginning of the year to now, what's the ceiling? Like that, if we double to 48 in another year, I'm about to be balling. Until reality hits and the true value of gold hit. And I don't know how that's going to pan out, but it's my job. What's that? Okay. So it's my job in this format to get you guys thinking about this stuff. You can do your Googles on your own to get additional research, but understand that what glitters, all right, and this is twinkling right now. It's twinkling. But understand what's causing it to twinkle, which then brings us to small businesses. The reason that I stand 10 toes down on small businesses being the greatest asset class for us to invest in is because when you do it the right way, you control the variables and you produce cash flow in the interim, right? So as value is being engineered into the business, that then gives you the ability to be able to sell that business in the future, right? That's value in the future, but you're producing cash flow right now when you're doing it the right way, right? So again, when it comes to the asset classes that are available to us, understanding the unique opportunity that we have right now, because what is happening right now across the economy, the wealth gap is going to continue to just get wider and wider. In other words, those that ain't got it and those that got it, that's the game. That's the game. So what are we going to do about that? Again, owning a business gives you the ability to create an asset that you invest your time and your money into, understanding that that generated value that you were engineering into the business is going to pay off in the future. Because the sale of a business is different kinds of money once you've engineered value into it. Now, if you've created a job for yourself, in other words, if you take you out of your business, there is no business, What is the value of said business? Is there anyone in here that would purchase a job? So if you are not structuring your business for it to operate independently of you, you are building a job and it will not sell at a price point that justifies all of the sacrifices that you make into your business. So the amount of times that you're sitting stressed behind the computer, making things work, figuring it out for years, how you going to make payroll? To 20 years down the road, when you're trying to sell, you get your company valued and you find out it ain't worth nothing. The reason that I'm painting that so vividly is because I've seen it too many times. 70-year-old people that have been running their businesses since Moby Dick was a minnow, and it ain't worth nothing. That hurts. The decisions that you make in your business today are going to influence what it is worth tomorrow. So understanding that your business is in fact an asset, and how we invest into said asset is going to determine what it produces for us over the long haul. Does that make sense? Outstanding. When it comes to the small business piece, and this is kind of the breakdown of how I'm going to present to you how you can create that business that is not a job, that is going to free you and your family from this system that we live in. All right? Because when you do it the right way, you have the ability to produce that. So again, when it comes to small business and growing small businesses, first, understanding the value of time, critical. And we're going to talk about how to kind of measure that. Leveraging data. We kind of spoke to it a little bit, but I'm going to really dig into how to understand what your data means, what the numbers are telling you, and then leveraging human psychology. Because what separates a business from being a hobby are the numbers and human psychology. Because on the human psychology side, what we're looking to do is to create a framework that is going to optimize the performance of our employees, how productive that they are. That is human psychology. We also want to influence the way that could-be customers see our brand so that they are willing to spend money with us. Human psychology. We're going to talk about those things as we move throughout the presentation. But first, let's talk about the value of time. So I'm pretty well versed on the value of my time, so I can speak to that with a certain level of confidence, obviously. So I'm using myself as an example to teach you guys how to understand the value of your own time. So I mentioned to you before, in 2018 is when I started professionally consulting. In 2020 is when I started working with small businesses. Each week, so I would work with my clients wherever that their business was in the country. Each week, my clients would get billed anywhere between $325 to $595 per hour for me to advise them on their businesses. So I'm working with them for 40 hours. I give them an invoice for anywhere between $17,000 to $25,000. They write the check. I send it to headquarters. Headquarters send me my little pennies of it, right? Because obviously I'm not getting that $17,000 to $25,000. But the point that I'm making here is I'm very clear on my value because I've had checks exchanged based on the things that I've done. It is critical that you understand your value. If you think about electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, the reason that a lot of those guys will go independent is because they see how much their bosses are charging for the work that's getting done. So you go from, hold on a second, y'all making that and you value me at that? Where they do that at? Got me messed up. And then we go the independent route, right? But you got to understand your value first, what you're able to bring to the table. Now, ultimately, when we're talking about value, value is about what someone is willing to pay. So when I resigned from the consulting firm that I was working for and I came here to Colorado Springs, the idea of me walking in, because the invoices that I presented to my clients for $17,000 to $25,000, they had a logo up there at the top that had 25 years of credibility behind it. So regardless of what I did, they were paying for the brand. So when I get here to Colorado Springs, and now my brand is Bullseye Consulting, do I have 25 years of brand identity in the community associated with that? Absolutely not. Did my value change? If anything, it's increased. I assure you that, right? But I got to start a brand. I'm growing my brand. So when I started my brand here in Colorado Springs, $50 an hour got it done. Now, $195 an hour gets it done. All right. Now it's been 2 years, but that's going to continue to grow. But where that starts at is I know my value. If y'all don't know my value, that's not my problem. I know my value, right? So now it's my responsibility, and that was kind of false what I just said, because it's my responsibility for y'all to understand my value so that you're willing to pay it, right? And as an entrepreneur, it's my job to present that so that you understand it. So again, coming here to Colorado Springs about 2.5 years ago, could I demand anywhere between $325 to $595 per hour for my expertise under Bullseye Consulting? So that is a lane that was available to me that I didn't see at that time. I saw it, but I saw it being a much longer lane and being more challenging, as opposed to actually demonstrating the value that I'm able to produce. So now there are people that can speak to Bullseye Consulting specifically, and the rates reflect that. So the more people that understand what Bullseye Consulting delivers, the rates will reflect that as well. Okay? So again, I share that because it is important for you to understand your value. Because once you understand your value, it is your responsibility to charge twice and add tax, federal, state, and municipal. I need all that fettuccine. What are we talking about? Right? But if you don't know your value, you can't charge accordingly. And you will be sitting there asking yourself, man, I don't feel like I'm getting paid fairly for what it is and you start building resentment for the things that you're doing because you're making all of these sacrifices in order to make your business work, and you don't feel like it's producing for you the way that it should financially. That's not where we want to be at. So, talking just some basic math here. When we talk about $195 an hour, my capacity is 26 clients per week, which means that I have the ability, the capacity just for coaching alone to produce $5,000 a week when I have full 26 clients. But in order for that to happen, because as a business consultant and a business coach, when I show up to my clients each week, you best believe I got to have my stuff together. I can't demand that rate without having my stuff together. In order for me to have my stuff together, there's a lot of administrative work that has to get done. So then it comes down to who's doing that administrative work and where does it make sense within my organizational structure, right? So talking about math here, I got a virtual assistant. Last week, my virtual assistant spent 14.6 hours on administrative tasks. Now, if I were spending my 14.5 hours last week doing that administrative work, that reduces my capacity by 10 clients. Because now I have to spend that time getting ready to meet with my clients. So by not being able to meet my capacity of 26 clients, it reduces it to 16, which in turn reduces what I'm able to produce in a week to 3,100, or a 38.5% decrease from my capacity. Just from doing administrative tasks that I don't have to do. My clients don't pay what they pay for the administrative stuff. They pay what they pay for what I'm telling them when we're together. And what I'm telling them when we're together is based on the administrative tasks. So it is a hand, like they both got to get done, but it's a matter of who's going to do it. Looking at these numbers, does it make sense for me to do the administrative tasks? Understand your value, right? Okay, so the way that we're able to do that is by leveraging data. Now, this is the part that it's not fun until you understand it. Once you understand it, then it becomes fun, right? Reason being, when you are flying your business blindly, in other words, every day is just kind of happening how it's happening, and you gauge your success by what's in your bank account. That is the equivalent of going out to your vehicle, putting your key in the ignition, foot on the brake, car in gear, just to recognize that your dashboard is completely out. So you got no speedometer to tell you how fast that you're going. You got no fuel gauge to let you know how much that you got in the tank. You got no temperature gauge to let you know if your engine is in danger of overheating. You got no oil gauge to let you know if all of the components in your engine are properly lubricated. If y'all dashboard was out in your vehicle when you went out there tonight, would that be a source of concern for you? Yet we fly our businesses blindly every day. Our financial reports are our dashboard to our business. Your profit and loss statement and your balance sheet is the equivalent of the dashboard in your vehicle. Would you drive your vehicle for long without a dashboard?
No.
And that is the criticality of the data. Now, what prevents a lot of folks from paying attention to their data is that they don't know what it means. So they're looking at their profit and loss statement and it's darn near hieroglyphics. What am I supposed to do with this if I can't read it? And that's what this portion of the presentation is about. Being able to read the data to understand where you are. All right. So first and foremost, if we don't have a goal coming into the week, at the end of that week, how do we know if we had a good week or not? It makes it kind of difficult, right? If we have no goals. So it starts there. What is it that we're working toward? What goal do we have set for ourselves so that we can measure what good looks like? So in this, actually, when it comes to really maximizing your data, you win the year a week at a time. And what I mean by that is, let's imagine that we are already in November and we are now comparing October's closed out financial performance to September's closed out financial performance. In September, I'm going to go with the same example. We spent 22% of our total revenue on payroll. In October, we spent 32%. So now we spent 10% more on payroll. That 10% matters to everybody here in this room, right? Obviously. Now, what happens if the primary driver of that 10% variance happened in the second week of October and you are now in November trying to determine what happened in October? What is the likelihood of you remembering all of the things that happened in week 2 of October when we are now in week 1 of November? Kind of difficult, right? Now, if we are looking at our financial results from last week, this week, how difficult is it for us to recall what happened last week? So when we can have those conversations about what happened last week, we then can tighten up our processes because we find out what happened, what worked, and what didn't work. I'll give you an example of that. So I met with one of my clients earlier today, and they do trades-based work. So they planned to complete 155 hours of jobs last week. They actually got the work done in 139 hours. So they did it, they were efficient. Right? Now that's great. But my job isn't to hype them up when it's like, we got to talk about the missed opportunity there. So what that missed opportunity is, that was a 16-hour gap. Could those 16 hours have been sold to other customers? So the 16 hours was paid out in payroll. The additional 16 hours was paid out in payroll, and it brought back no additional revenue. So we spoke about the 195, right? So their hourly rate, you multiply it by the 16, and that's missed opportunity. Gone. If you're not paying attention to that, how will you know? So now whatever caused that 16-hour overage from last week, that becomes law. That's how we operate now, because we didn't even know what happened, because we didn't look down at our dashboard. Critical. All right. So what we have here on line 1 is revenue performance, right? Which is the amount of money that actually hit the bank account. That's a pretty important number, right? So, and for this example here, the last week of recorded data, they brought in $16,000 in revenue. So now we can compare that to last year's performance, where last year they averaged $9,000 a week in revenue, which is what hit their bank account. And moving to this year, in quarter 1 of this year, they averaged $17,000 a week. Quarter 2, they averaged $14,000 a week. Quarter 3, they averaged $12,000 a week. So now, looking at last week, we can compare the 16,000 to what has happened for the rest of the year. Are we up or down in our performance? So that 16,000, is that positive or negative to what we've done for the year as a baseline? Does that make sense as a question? Okay, so I'll just break it down simple. So $16,000 is $16,000 more than $17,000? Is it more than $14,000? Is it more than $12,000? Okay, so for two out of the 3 quarters, last week beat 2 out of the 3 quarters average performance. Call that a pretty good week, right? Because the only quarter that beat last week's performance was the first quarter. Now that's a conversation to be had, because how did we allow the first quarter to drop down so precipitously? Right? When we understand that our sales performance is dropping, we can take action to reverse that or to correct that. But if we don't know that our sales performance is dropping, different conversation. Okay? So again, when we start talking about winning the year a week at a time, if you know what you did last week and you're able to compare that to the quarter, you're able to compare that to last quarter, you're able to compare that to your average over the course of the year, you know if you're hitting your marks or not. When we talk about accounts receivables, you would fall out your chairs if you knew how many folks got tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of money that they've already delivered the services and they sent out the invoices. They just haven't collected yet. Tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of uncollected. We done already did the work. I see this stuff every day. Like, I can show y'all reports. One of my clients, their accounts receivables balance is $340,000. I can't make that up. So how does that happen? How that happens is by not having balance within the business. When you got so much flying at you, imagine how much got to be flying at you for you to have $340,000 owed to you that you ain't collected. Think about that. When you don't structure your business properly, it's very easy, easier than you would imagine, for you to end up being behind the power curve in multiple ways. Collecting the money is just as important as generating the sale, right? More important. So then talking about our cost of goods sold. Now, what I see with cost of goods sold oftentimes is the business owner is doing the majority of the work, which means that, well, actually, let me rewind back for a second. So what your cost of goods sold is the measurement of how much that it costs you to produce and deliver the products and services that your business offers, right? So that's generally going to be the labor, the materials, and all of the other things that go directly towards delivering the products and services. So we're not talking about business insurance. We're not talking about rent. We're not talking about interest, or any of those things. Those are overhead expenses. Cost of goods sold is specifically the labor, materials, and otherwise resources that it takes to produce and deliver whatever it is that the company sells. So to that point, oftentimes I can look at a profit and loss statement and I can see that their cost of goods sold is very low, right? And to the untrained eye, that's great. Like that means that we are operating efficiently. To the trained eye, let's dig in there. So as the business owner, how much are you paying yourself? Oh man, that becomes a whole different conversation. So you producing all of these services, but you have no accounting for how much that it actually costs you to produce it. Because you're not thinking about the time that it takes you and what the value of your time is. It's not thought about. It's an afterthought. Now, how do we scale if we don't know how much time that it takes us to produce and deliver the products and services that we offer as a business? How can we scale? Because what takes me 10 minutes, and this is actually an example, this actually happened. So given that with my virtual assistant, I track everything. I'm a business coach. I don't just be up here just talking. Like I do the things that I speak about, right? So my virtual assistant, one of the administrative tasks, it takes me 5 minutes to perform that task. And I saw that it took her 14 minutes to do it. So what I did was went through the full task with her and showed her how it took me 5 minutes. And I asked her, so what's happening on your side where a 5-minute task is taking 14? Where was your antennas? And having that conversation, we were able to identify what was causing her to take 14 minutes to complete that task. Now, if I didn't check that, then that means that every time that she performs a 5-minute task, it's going to take her 14. At least. And I'm paying for that. How do you think I feel about that? You got me. We ain't doing that. But again, we can't have that conversation if we don't know how long that each of the tasks takes. So when you're thinking about whatever it is that you produce, you got to be thinking about it in that context. What are the resources that it takes to produce those goods and services? Yes, ma'am.
Because you're having a conversation with the virtual assistant, one, I didn't know that was a thing. So two, do you file this virtual assistant like on your taxes as an employee, since this is costing you money?
Now, virtual assistants. So let's talk about the difference between a virtual assistant versus a W-2 employee or a contractor, a 1099 contractor versus W-2. So with a W-2, I got to pay workers' comp, insurance. I got all these things that I got to cover when I hire somebody W-2. My virtual assistant, nah, all that's included. We good. I ain't got to worry about none of that. And it's a fraction of what it would cost me to hire someone here in the States. But again, as a business owner, it's my job to know what it takes to produce what I deliver. Now, you do bring up an incredible point. So I spoke about the AI bubble a little bit earlier. When it comes to us operating as entrepreneurs and especially controlling our cost of goods sold, if we are not leveraging everything that comes along with AI, it is akin to entrepreneurial abuse. We are abusing ourselves by not leveraging AI. So you can think that this is just some little fad or whatever and you don't need to understand it. You will be left behind. Like that's a to be sure, right? You will be left behind if you are not leveraging AI to grow your business. Again, the reason we're spending so much time on this piece of the conversation is because this piece is too easy to overlook. It's too easy for you to be the greatest at whatever it is that you do. And you don't even think about how long that it takes you. It ain't about you though. Growing a business is about how you're able to grow a team. So how do you take a team and turn them into extended legs of you? where they are producing to the same quality clip that you produce. If you're not able to set those expectations, results may vary. Cost of goods sold, critical component to be measuring, to understand how much that it costs us to produce the goods and services that we deliver. Now, the metric itself, as far as understanding the percentage that we've spent relative to the revenue that's been generated, it's important to measure that piece, but then we also have some of those leading key performance indicators that feed into cost of goods sold, right? So, for example, that task that takes me 5 minutes and took my virtual assistant 14 minutes. If I know that on an average day, 6 of those tasks should be completed, right? Well, those 6 tasks being completed has a direct correlation to how much money that my company is going to make. So if I got 6 of those happening, my revenue should be looking this way. If I double the amount of those, then that means that my workload has doubled, so my revenue should reflect that. If I'm paying attention to these leading indicators, then the metric, once it shows up, ain't going to be so much of a surprise, because I know that these numbers have been dropping over here. So now when I look at my profit and loss statement and see it reflected in what's actually in my bank account, I understand that. So cost of goods sold, again, breaking down truly all of the different tasks that you're performing within your business, developing standard operating procedures and checklists so that that stuff becomes standardized. And then you're able to hold folks accountable for what what they're producing for you or not producing for you. Which then brings us to sales performance. What are some of the primary ways that you guys are using to create brand awareness for your business? How are people finding out about you? Regardless of which methods and strategies that you guys employ to generate the awareness, if it is not a part of a more robust overall strategy, in other words, we are doing this to achieve this outcome. And in order to achieve this outcome, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And this result will be produced on the other side of it. So that's another one of the, like those key performance indicators, the leading metrics that feed into what the ultimate result is going to be. So if you know that what your average ticket cost is, in other words, when you bring on a new customer, you know how much that they are going to spend with you on average. Then you know how many people that you need to be converting into customers in order to hit your sales goal. So now it's a matter of what activities that it takes in order to generate the requisite awareness that then gets nurtured and converted into paying customers. Those metrics. So data. And I know it's not necessarily the piece that's the most sexy when you don't understand it. I assure you, when you do understand it, it's different, because then you start to control the outcomes of your business as opposed to just kind of sitting back and hoping that everything pans out properly. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So we look backwards to plan forward, right? So the way that I'm able to give my clients a projection on what they're projected to do for the year. So one of my clients was projected to do over $1 million earlier this year, and they're now projected to do 820,000, right? So they are able to watch their projections decrease based on them not taking the actions that they've been coached on. So the numbers, like I cannot foot stomp this enough. And I know it's easy for us to turn a blind eye to it because it may feel intimidating. If you were not paying attention to your numbers, you're not in business. Yes, ma'am.
Do you recommend a certain software, like that's user friendly or beginner friendly or expert?
Absolutely. So this is not an endorsement for QuickBooks, because QuickBooks is an incredible resource to keep your financial transactions organized. However, describing their customer service as garbage would be a compliment. Their customer service is absolutely terrible. However, when you understand how the system works, it is an incredible resource. I kind of tap dance in QuickBooks, but it took me time to understand how it works. Once you understand how, well, actually, and that is an incredible question. Before we even start talking about those different accounting resources that are available to you, it is critical for you to understand generally accepted accounting principles. If you don't understand generally accepted accounting principles, it is the equivalent of operating a calculator without understanding the principles of math. How valuable is a calculator going to be for you if you don't understand the principles of math? QuickBooks is going to be the same thing for you if you don't understand generally accepted accounting principles. So it is critical that you do understand that piece just from a managerial accounting perspective. So what that means, what managerial accounting means is understanding the principles of accounting enough to understand how the activities that you are engaging in your business are producing financially. That's managerial accounting, right? So yes, you need to know the generally accepted accounting principles, and then QuickBooks is an incredible resource to keep all of your transactions organized, and you can produce your financial statements as well.
Does it get into like the granular detail that you have, or?
When you set it up that way,
Okay.
yes, you can set it up that way. Absolutely. And then our additional metrics. So EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That is basically your net profit. Now, the reason that your net profit is so important when we start talking about how businesses are valued, when you have a third-party valuation company come in to actually value your company, what they're going to do is take like the last 4 or 5 years of financial statements and analyze and kind of determine what the value of the company is accordingly. One of those metrics that they're looking at is your EBITDA, or your net profit. So if you're not operating profitably, that is directly going to impact the value of the company. Now, given, because a lot of small businesses aren't thinking about that. So that nightmare scenario that I described earlier, where someone's 70 years old, they've been operating their business since Moby Dick was a minnow, and they find out that it has no value when they go to get the valuation completed. That's because they weren't tracking their financial performance, and they didn't even know that they weren't profitable. They just know that it gets tight when it's time for payroll. But understanding what that actually means on paper, because this is about what we got to report to the IRS. This is about what is going to be used as source documentation when they are determining the value of your business. So it's incredibly important to ensure that you are monitoring your net profitability and that it is growing. Well, depending on what your goal is. So if your goal is to sell your company, then the EBITDA piece is critically important. If you're not looking to sell your company, then the EBITDA becomes less important. Now, the reason that I make that distinction is, so for me personally, I'm not going to be selling Bullseye Consulting. So I don't care if my EBITDA doesn't reflect what it actually is. So I will go and reinvest and be doing all kinds of things to reduce what my profitability looks like, because I understand business, right? And what my intended outcome is. I'm not looking to sell my company. If y'all are looking to sell your businesses in the future, again, that EBITDA piece is absolutely critical. So now getting into some of the human psychology elements of taking the talents that we possess as individuals and turning it into a structure that we can hire a team into. That is what this looks like. So if you're looking at your business like a four-legged stool, the four legs of that stool first is your sales, which sales is about bringing in your leads, generating those leads, and nurturing those leads into conversion. So that's the first leg. The second leg is going to be your operations leg, and that is how you produce and deliver the products and services that you sell. The third leg is going to be the accounting and finance, which ensures that your financial reports are actually worth the paper that they're printed on. Okay? Because there are a lot of folks that have profit and loss statements and balance sheets where the transactions weren't accurately categorized to begin with, which means that their financial reports are not accurate, right? It's basically useless. So that's the third leg. And then the fourth leg is management and compliance. And management and compliance is basically ensuring that you have all of the framework in place so that things consistently flow in your business and you are in compliance with federal, state, and municipal laws and policies that govern your industry. So those are the four legs. Now, for anybody in this room, if y'all were to go and sit on a four-legged stool that has 1 weak leg, how much security do you have in that chair that it's going to keep you up? You start to question it, right? Now, what happens if 2 of those legs are weak? And 3 ain't even a question. What is so unfortunate is oftentimes small businesses are lucky to have 1 strong leg, and they don't have the competence to even consider the other 3. They're so good at the operation side, doing the thing. Whatever it is that they are good at, they're really good at that. That's not what business is. When you do not have balance on that stool, it falls apart. The same thing in your business. When you do not have balance, intentional balance in your business, there are various forms of what falling apart can look like. So the organizational chart gives you the ability to kind of take the conceptual idea of your business and to put it on paper from a functional perspective. Now, generally, when I present an org chart to my clients, the first thing that they say to me is, I ain't got all them people. I can't afford all them people. You trying to put me out of, you trying to take me smooth out. You want me to hire all these folks? I can't do all that. Right. You know what I'm saying? I can't do that. I never said nothing about people. These are functions. Are these functions happening in the business? If the functions are happening in the business, then they have specific roles and responsibilities that are associated with them, right? So when we're looking at our business from the perspective of sales operations, management and accounting, and financial controls, this gives us that function. So up under operations, what are all of the things that are necessary, the steps that are necessary to produce the goods and services that the business offers? So going back to what I explained earlier, I got to have a lot of administrative stuff done in my business. That's a function, right? My development of like becoming a business coach was intentional. Like I wanted to be who I am. So the probability of me being able to go out and find a me to hire, very low, very low. But I'll be doggone if I can't build a bunch of me's. And that's what your org chart enables you to do. Produce an army of yourself by taking all of the functions that are required in your business, the steps that you're taking in order to make sure that those things are getting done, and assigning them to a role and setting expectations accordingly. Then once we have our org chart structured, our job descriptions. Now, what the job description does for you is gives you the ability to source for candidates that you will consider for hiring, right? So that's like the outward facing, and it sets the tone for the role itself, right? It don't got nothing to do with the person. That is the role itself. So if you are hired as an apprentice, these are the expectations of an apprentice. And that's the criticality of your job description. Now, to that point, seldomly do I run across business owners that actually have, small business owners, the folks that I'm working with, that have org charts and job descriptions already in place. Or if they do have them in place, they are so outdated, right? So we look at the job description for any of the roles in their companies, and we kind of do a little audit. Are y'all still doing that? Man, we ain't did that in years. Are y'all still doing it? Man, I don't remember doing that. Right? Because they didn't update their job descriptions. This piece is necessary because when it comes to setting the initial expectation of what the role requirements are, that's what this does. One of the tools that could be beneficial for you guys in developing those job descriptions is if you record a voice note of all of the things that you expect within any given function in your organization. How I mentioned before, how not leveraging AI is akin to entrepreneurial abuse. We got a whole bunch of AI resources out here where we can take the transcript from that recorded voice note, plug it into ChatGPT, and say, check it out. I'm looking to hire for this function. I need you to take this transcript and turn it into a job description. And now you review that to make sure that it accurately reflects what you want to see in those positions. Now, I am not a lawyer. I'm not here to give legal advice. Don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. We ain't doing that. No, the devil is a lie. Now, when it comes to owning a business, we sign up for all that, right? So what that means is it's our job to make sure that we have the appropriate resources available to us to cover all facets of the business. So one resource that is available is LegalZoom if you can't afford a lawyer, right? That's something to consider, right? Because again, when you're talking about things that could total line of, because you can sue anybody for anything in this good old United States of America. So to ensure that you are protected against ridiculous litigation, it is worth its weight in gold to make sure that you have the appropriate resources available to you to make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. All right, so we spoke about the job description, which then brings us to the performance expectations. Now, the distinction between the job description and the performance expectations, the job description applies to the role, the performance expectations apply to the individual. Now, the reason that that's so important is in a trades-based company that hires apprentices, is every hired apprentice going to perform to the same degree? Right? Everybody going to be hitting at different marks. So what the performance expectations does is speaks to the individual and lets them know how they can specifically maximize their performance in whatever role that they have been assigned. Right? This is the tailored approach to you. This is what's going to make you successful in your role. What will oftentimes be one of the biggest productivity losses in a business is the unsaid feedback, where you guys as the business owner, you're looking at your virtual assistant and you're like, man, I don't know if I really got what I paid for today. It don't feel like it, but I need them to do what they're doing and I don't want them to quit. So I'm not going to give them no feedback because they might quit. You know what's worse than them quitting in some instances? Keeping the wrong person will sink your business. So those expectations are vitally important. When you're having those conversations with yourself, they're like, that math ain't mathing. How did that take that amount of time? How do we structure that conversation constructively to have it directly with the individual? Performance expectations are one of the tools that assist with that. Now, when it comes to the actual follow-up feedback conversations, because what you don't want to do is find yourself in a death loop of just talking to be talking. So it's about holding your folks accountable for the expectations that have been set. But it's your responsibility to make sure that they're clearly set and understood. These are tools that help in that endeavor. When we're talking about the human psychology element of things, how effectively that you are communicating with your team is going to make all of the difference in the world. So to that point, there's a fundamental difference between management and leadership. If you recognize within yourself that you are not a leader, that may be one of the first positions that you want to source for hiring. You know how I mentioned having the wrong person? Bad leadership will turn them into the wrong person or the bad person on your team. If you know that leadership ain't your jam, there's nothing wrong with that. But what are you doing about it? Because you create problems within your own infrastructure If you know that leadership ain't your thing, and what you're doing is creating an army of quiet quitters where they show up every day to collect their paycheck until you get rid of them. One of the key components when it comes to leveraging human psychology for employees, if you want to measure the connection between your employee and reality, ask them to assess their performance. This is a tool that helps you to remove the emotional component of giving performance feedback to somebody. Because if you ask them to assess themselves, again, a lot of people are disassociated with reality when they are assessing what they bring to the table. So how you have a conversation with them that's constructive. Glad y'all asked the question, right? So one of the tools that will help you to do that is if you take all of the tasks within your business that it takes in order to deliver the products and services that have been sold, and you break them down into tasks that need to be completed and competencies that need to be executed. And we're assessing all of those individually on a 1 to 5 scale. A 5 being, you know what? I trust you to train people on that task because you're so cold at it. You done mastered it that I can trust you to train other folks. A 4 being, you are above average and I don't got to double check on you. Not gonna have you training folks yet, because that leadership piece, you ain't strong on the leadership side. So we just gonna go with you being the productive workhorse that you are, right? So you're that 4, because when I ask you to get it done, it gets done, and I don't got to go back and double check on you. A 3 being that you are average, and every now and again, I still got to go and double check on you to make sure that nothing was missed. A 2 being, we know we got some hand holding going on, right? I'm going to show up with you at the job and I'm going to walk you through all of it because it's new to you and I know it's new to you. 1 being, we haven't got to that task yet. We're going to get into that training a little bit down the road. Or you teeter in the lines of unemployment. That 1 to 5 scale takes all of that subjectivity and emotion out of the mix. The way that you're able to hedge against that disassociation with reality that a lot of employees have, unfortunately, is you ask them to self-assess. So these are all of the tasks that I expect for you to be able to execute for your role. Give me your assessment, where you feel you are on the scale.
Would you rate your team, like rack and stack them in front of their face?
Hell no.
Hey,
No. A key piece of the answer to your question is the separation between professional and unprofessional behavior, right? So I'm going to firstly apologize because your question, like it hit my spirit and it pulled that hell no, just flew out of me because you don't necessarily want to do it. So I want to apologize for me losing my professionalism. Now, hold on. I'm gonna get there. Now, when we're talking about the distinction between professional versus unprofessional behavior, right? We don't know how everybody is going to respond to those types of things. And we are building a culture of accountability and productivity. There are certain things that can be introduced to a culture within the organization that will cause it to implode. Not knowing how folks are going to respond to that type of feedback in that type of setting, like it could flat out become violent. Some folks are that way, and you don't know until certain buttons are pushed. So once that has happened, you can't rebottle that. Your point, though, is valid. The piece that you made as far as incentivizing a higher level of performance. So it's a matter of how you go about doing that. Has anybody in here seen Wolf of Wall Street? Wolf of Wall Street, they would have they like getting the day started festivities. What that created, you would have some folks sitting on the sideline like, bruh, how I get in on that? That culture was created where we are rewarding performance and we just ignoring those folks that ain't showing up to produce. So we ain't got to say nothing negative to them. They get to watch success happen in front of them every day. I want to get it. I'm trying to get on. I'm trying to be what that be like. You know what I mean? And they just sitting and watching. There's a value proposition to structuring a culture in which the team understands that they're going to be rewarded for producing.
Do you feel like the conversation that I mentioned, do you feel like there's a setting for that or a business for that? And I say, like, if we're a bunch of board members and we're having these rough conversations, like we got a meeting of the minds, alpha personalities, we at the table to move the mission forward, where that's okay versus from boss to
Right.
subordinate.
The beauty of being an entrepreneur is that you create the culture that you want in your organization. So when it comes to growth and sustainment, a wise man by the name of Sir Michael Tyson once prophetically proclaimed, everybody got a plan till they get punched in the face.
Yeah. Sometimes they need it.
Now understand the life of an entrepreneur. In a lot of instances, we signed up for random moments in the day to get punched smooth in the face. Right? That's what we signed up for. Those unplanned occurrences that are just going to pop up that test our resilience, which is why it's so important to have a solid why as to why you're doing what it is that you're doing. Because when you get punched in the face, it's going to be that why that's going to be the determining factor on if you continue on or not. And that why got to be strong. So it's critical that we all have and we are connected to our why, because the adversity will come. You can count on it. It will come. And it's going to test your resolve. Your why oftentimes will be the determining factor on how you respond to getting punched in the face. Okay, so talking about sales, it breaks down into like a bit of a science, right? The first phase of our sales funnel is creating brand awareness. In other words, how people are finding out about you. Once we are generating the awareness for people to know that we exist, how are we presenting enough value that's creating interest in them to understand how whatever it is that you provide could solve a problem that they have? How are you converting that awareness into interest? And how are you measuring the converted awareness into interest? So some of the ways to think about that is social media. And I see this oftentimes where, years ago they said 3 pieces of content per day is supposed to feed the algorithm, right? Regardless of what your posting matrix looks like, what's most important is you measuring what's being produced from those activities. In other words, if we're creating a whole bunch of awareness on social media and we lit, but it ain't translating to the bank account, then what value is all of that awareness online? So the way that we go about having measurement on what our sales strategy is actually producing is to measure each component. So on social media, if we put a post out there and it has a reach of 500 people, and in the caption of that post, the call to action was for them to go to your website. So you have 500 people that saw the post. As sure as I'm standing here, the majority of folks are not paying attention to that stuff. Business owners, they're not paying attention to that stuff. They may be looking at the reach, but they're not looking at their website traffic. Yeah. And if we know that the website is intended to increase that interest and to convert it into consideration, where I'm now not only interested in how your value can fix a problem that I have, I'm actively considering if I'm going to let you address the problem that I'm having, and if I'm going to pay you for that service or that good. That's that consideration piece. The website is going to help to take someone that has found out about you, if your website is structured properly. It's going to take that person that has now found out about you and put some more meat on that bone. Them recognizing, oh man, I actually am in the right place, because that post on social media got me here, but now I know I'm in the right spot. Measuring the awareness being generated, that being converted into interest, that being converted into into consideration rather. And then we got the actual conversion. But the sales cycle doesn't stop at a converted customer. The lifetime value of your customer. How are you increasing the lifetime value of your customer? In other words, the first time that they spend money with you, how do you lay the framework for the second time that they spend money with you? And the third time that they spend money with you? That's the lifetime value. So we want to increase that lifetime value. So again, our sales cycle don't stop at conversion. Our sales strategy don't stop there. How are we increasing the lifetime value? Now, the cherry on the top is when that customer becomes an evangelist for your brand. They out in the community yelling it from the mountaintops. When you got this problem, you got to check my man out, right? That evangelistic approach to sending referrals. How do you build a brand that when people get a taste of it, they want to tell everybody about it? So all of that stuff matters when we're talking about measuring the effectiveness of our overall sales strategy. Now, this is kind of some rough math on how to plan out sales growth. So if you know that your average customer sale is $650 and your monthly sales goal is $5,500, if you attend 2 networking groups and those 2 networking groups generally results in 12 one-to-ones being scheduled, right? So now you're sitting down with 12 people for y'all to have that conversation about how y'all can bring value to each other. For every 12 one-to-ones that you schedule, you're able to book 3 discovery meetings. Of the 3 discovery meetings, you're generally able to close 2 of them. Well, now, in order to hit our sales goal, we know how much awareness has to be created at the beginning. So if 2 networking groups are going to produce that amount of one-to-ones and we need more one-to-ones in order to increase our sales, then we need to be going to more networking groups if that's your primary means of creating awareness. And then the hiring and retention. So it takes anywhere between 1.5 to 2 times someone's annual salary to replace them. So to having a revolving door of employees is hustling backwards. So how do we attract the greatest talent? And most importantly, how do we retain said talent? Because there is a true business cost to turnover. Because you got to think about the amount of time that it takes to train that individual. You got to think about the amount of time that's just lost because they're screwing things up and they got to do it 2 or 3 times. That's all payroll that's being spent. And if they don't know how to manage the materials properly, so now you ordered this thing, this table as a part of whatever it is that you deliver. And as they're preparing this table, they scratch the top of it. They're preparing this for shipment, but they knew. So they scratched the top of it. Now you just increased your material cost because you got to replace this table. And you paid for it. You paid for them to screw your table up. Congratulations, you played yourself. Right? All of that stuff matters on the hiring and retention side.
You just have to like balance out
Right.
the attention that you give certain employees, because then now you put a target on that good employees back by their coworkers that they have to, because as a manager, you're not going to be in the office
Right.
every day, right?
Right.
You're going to be in there with your coworkers, and so you really have to monitor how you manage your staff, because that good employee might leave because of the employee that you gave this one rating to, hoping that they were going to increase their performance, where you lost a good employee
100%.
based on that environment.
And let's also talk about the flip side of that. How long is your top performer going to watch your lowest performing employee do their job and suck at it and never be held accountable before their performance starts to mirror what that other employee is doing? So there's a cost for sure. Lastly, we got a 5-minute survey that you guys can take. And the intent of it is to give you an idea of how strong that your business mind is relative to your business. What it is going to force you to do is to think about what you have in place and what you don't have in place relative to your business. And then you can move accordingly. So truly, this is purpose work for me. I stood up here for 2 hours and spoke about business and growing business, and you guys were engaged and locked in the entire time. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for caring about what your futures are going to look like relative to the businesses that you are building. Because in the country that we live in right now, we are essential to taking care of our communities. All of the problems that hails Colorado Springs, the answers start in rooms like these. So thank you for putting yourselves in these rooms.
Thank you.
Like,